and thank you for connecting the dots with what we heard this morning and in the afternoon. I'm sure there will be some questions and remarks, but I want to pass the floor now to Zaheer. Zaheer, you've dealt with private sector issues, how to mobilize them at your national level, but also in your functions of the as a chair and as a member of the Green Climate Fund. So share some of your lessons learned.
Okay. I thought I was talking on the public sector. You want me to talk on private sector? Everything. Okay. My name is Zaheer. I'm from South Africa. I represent the public, the private, the NGO, and everybody in South Africa. It's the truth. That's what I represent. I think when I asked Janine, I was not quite sure if I missed a memo on what I had to present here, but I do not apologize for what I'm going to tell you now. Because I think you need to hear it. And I'd like to respond to what many of the people were saying in the working groups. And Stefan, I'll talk about the private sector thing as well. One of the key things that people raised, and I'll go through some of the things, you talked about accreditation, you talked about the challenges about NDAs, you talked about getting entities accredited, you talked about approval processes, you talked about bankability, you talked about capacity, readiness, all these things came up. I think one of the biggest problems is that there's really a lack of communication. And a lack of communication because I have the privilege of not only sitting on the side of an NDA or that, but I also sit on the board of like the GCF and the other funds. And so you have the opportunity of seeing it from both sides. And often from what I'm seeing is that a lot of the things that you've raised up here is actually addressed in many of the funds. It's just a lack of communication in terms of how you apply that. From what Peter was saying, it's true. You're never going to have all the money you need to address all your needs. And that's the reality. So I don't think the GCF is going to be solving everything that you can. It's not going to finance all your NDCs and all your development agendas. So it becomes imperative on you to see how best you can utilize that to do the maximum of what you can do. So one of the first things that people talk about is how difficult it is to engage with funds. And it's true, because as a fund, you need to balance two things. On the one side, a rigorous process that you have to ensure, because you're dealing with taxpayers' money. You don't want to spend it in a bad way. But at the same time, you want to ensure that you create a system that allows the most easiest, simplest, or seamless access. So you balance the two. And unfortunately, what happens in most funds is we end up with a bureaucracy. So we think when we have more rigor, it means more checks, balances, bigger documents. So if I have to fill a concept note of 20 pages, I'm being more rigorous. Whereas sometimes you could do things in 1 or 2 pages. So that's something that enabling environments. It's about creating an enabling environment for you to engage with the funds, or as well as for you to create an enabling environment back home. What we try to do when we conceived the GCF and that is look at what we've done in other funds and try and create a fund that addresses that. So one of the key things you have in the GCF is something called fit for purpose. And the idea of fit for purpose is about creating a fund that is much more bespoke than having off-the-rack kind of fund. So you produce one kind of package for everybody and make sure that it fits everybody. That's not what you want to do with it. But you find that the problem in that some people think that because I'm an LDC or because I'm a SID or I'm in Africa or something, the fund is not there for me. But go and look at the fund. And accredited entities, you have accredited entities coming from SIDs, from Africa, from LDCs, all over. Of the 48 entities that you have, 25 are direct access entities. And it means that 25 entities have the same fiduciary standards and the same rigor like the IFC or the World Bank or the EBRD or the others. And these are entities from developing countries. Not everyone is going to have a direct access entity, and it's not an aspiration for every country to have a direct access entity. People don't understand what the purpose of a direct access entity is all about, or a national entity, or an entity. The entity doesn't actually do the implementation of the project. It's there to facilitate. It's there to act as a surrogate for the GCF or the GEF. Right. So you don't really, there are other entities you can use. So be very careful when you think about these things. What we don't do well in the funds is create great eligibility criteria. So if you look at the results areas and that you think you can bring any kind of project to the fund, part of what you're wanting to do with complementarity and coherence amongst funds, and the problem is that certain funds are designed to do certain things. Other funds do other things. The GCF was designed to do things at scale, remove barriers, to address risks, not to duplicate what GEF does, but to complement what GEF does. Not to duplicate what the adaptation does, but to complement what the adaptation does. But the reality is that there's competition amongst all the funds, so each one wants to say, we are the best, we're the greatest, we are the biggest, we have the most, you know, and that becomes a challenge. And I know people might not like it, me saying it, but it's the truth. Go and see the reports and everybody announces they're bigger and better than everybody else. But that's not what we try to do. What we try to do amongst the architecture funds is allow that you can do things in the GEF, take what you do in the GEF and scale it up in the GCF, or do stuff with the adaptation fund and scale it globally through the GCF. And that's what we're talking about, complementarity. The other problem that people have is many of these funds become like a Willy Wonka chocolate factory. Projects come in and they go out, and as they go into the pipeline, and if I want to give accreditation now as an entity, they will tell you there are 70 others, so you will be number 71. That's not the idea of what funds need to be doing. What the funds need to be doing is being more dynamic. So where we see an opportunity, where there's potential to do something, can you be able to be agile enough to do that? With the GCF is do RFPs, or requests for proposals, where we felt there's an opportunity, let's put some money and do something. So one of the things that we're looking at doing is, how do you engage small and medium enterprises in the private sector? Can we provide facilities to do that? Or how do you do enhanced direct access? Can we do something rapidly without having them have to go through a conveyor belt and come out on the other side? People talked about issues of language. We're trying to address it in the GCF. One of the things that I did as a board member is raised within the board the whole principle of volunteerism. We have a number of entities, Inter-American Development Bank, World Bank, EBRD, Asian Development Bank, right across they're all entities of the GCF. They all have well-resourced entities. Can they provide services to people to translate documents in it? They do it in bread and butter. So Asian Development Bank can help there. Inter-American Development Bank, you're doing Spanish countries in Spain, Spanish-speaking countries, can't you provide that service? And they're willing to provide that service. Unfortunately, there was no traction in the GCF board for that. But we need to look at innovative ways of addressing these things. Bankability. GCF is not interested in bankability because about bankability. If you have a bankable project, don't come to the GCF. Because bankability means the private sector are able to fund it. What the GCF is there to do is to make projects bankable. So take a project and make it commercial financiers can finance them. And this is the other challenge when we look at the private sector, because a lot of the projects that are coming to the GCF could very well be financed by the private sector themselves. So you don't want to crowd out. What you want to do with this is create greater opportunities. How do you engage domestic private sector? How do you get small and medium enterprises to be able to be engaged? That is what we're looking at. How do we make stuff bankable so that they can get the resources they want from whichever financial institutions out there? We don't want to crowd out the private sector in terms of that. Capacity building versus readiness. Capacity building, readiness program is not capacity building, but it's being treated like capacity building. One of the things that came up in the GCF when we're designing it is that people felt they did not have the capacity to develop portfolios. That is what the readiness was there. Not to have multiple workshops and things. The outcome of those workshops was a portfolio that could be financed with the GCF. Readiness was there to help you get entity accredited, if you wanted a direct access entity accredited. But unfortunately, what people are looking at readiness money is like it's a capacity building program, and everybody's asking for readiness money, and we're just churning out money that way. The object of the GCF is not readiness. The object of the GCF is financing qualitative projects at scale, and the readiness is to get us to doing that. Sorry, Janine and Steph, I'm taking too much of your time here.
You're coming to an end.
I'm coming to an end. Leveraging finance at scale. Leveraging finance at scale is not the ultimate goal. The goal is not to get $1 and get $50. The ultimate goal is to transition to low carbon and climate resilient development. So it's how do you apply that $50 that you're getting in the best possible way where you can maximize action on the ground. Often we find in the funds is that projects that come that have this high leveraging potential are seen favorable in relation to other projects. The reality is that what we're looking for is not just the goal of leveraging more money, but actually getting more action happening on the ground. And that's a very important thing for people also to think about, because that leads to the point of how do you understand scale? Scale is not about a $500 million project versus a $50 million project. Scale is the ability of doing maximized action on the ground at different levels of resources. Often also with a lot of the funds, when you engage with them, they're often telling you why it can't happen. So you don't have this, you don't have that. What you want in funds for many developing countries and that is a fund that tells you how do we make it happen, rather than saying why it can't happen. So I didn't answer all your questions, Stefan, on the private sector, but I was just basing it on much of the what you were saying there. So thank you, and I'm sorry if I upset somebody, but that's just how it is. That's the real life.
Thank you, Zaheer, and thank you for giving the full spectrum of what the GCF is and what it isn't. Chiz?
Thank you, Stefan. It's 3 minutes before 6 p.m. I think we're already past that time, so I'm going to make it very, very